This week's topic is deployment, Windows deployment services, Sysprep, SCCM, and MDT. Lots and lots of abbreviations this week, as there are every week in Windows Server Administration. So, the first topic is Windows Deployment Services, often abbreviated to WDS. So, what are the benefits of WDS? Well, first of all, what is Windows Deployment Services? Windows Deployment Services is a server role that allows us to deploy operating systems over a Windows network. So this can reduce complexity and cost, and it will transmit the data using multicast, which will reduce network congestion. It allows us to create specified images using a capture wizard. It also allows you to deploy driver packages. It allows re-imaging of machines with minimal configuration. And it looks like I've said the thing about multicast twice in this. So I will definitely fix that before putting it onto the VLE. So, and ensuring continuity, I suppose that's just a kind of, I don't know, sales pitch. Right. So when we add the Windows Deployment Services role onto the Windows Server, we're actually adding two subcomponents. And those two subcomponents are the transport server with a multicast engine, which is fairly straightforward. This just allows us to transport data over the network. So it's quite a simple concept, the transport server. The transport server transports things. Then we have the deployment services, including a PXE server, PXE, the pre-boot execution environment, the image store, where boot and WIM images are held, the WDS client, and a TFTP server. So TFTP is used for Windows Deployment Services. TFTP also gets used when we copy a Cisco iOS image or back up a Cisco iOS data. We use a TFTP server for that. The reason we use TFTP is because TFTP is a fast and simple protocol. It doesn't send back acknowledgements like secure FTP would do. It's just a straight UDP connection using port 69. But before we can have Windows Deployment Services working, we need an NTFS partition to store images. We'll need DNS working. We'll need DHCP working, and we'll need Active Directory set up. So luckily we've covered these in weeks 1, 2, and 3. So now that we're on to week 4, we can add on Windows Deployment Services. So what actually is a pre-boot execution environment? So the pre-boot execution environment is sometimes pronounced as PXE. The PXE or PXE specification is a standardized client-server environment that boots software over a network card. So we may have in the past installed an operating system using a USB stick, or installed an operating system using an ISO on a CD or a DVD. But another way to do it onto the machine is to install the software using the network card to draw the operating system from the network card. Okay, and in order to do that, we need to have a PXE enabled network card. Okay, it has to be now most network cards these days are PXE capable. So it's not really something that you might encounter. But there is a special case for what you can do if you don't have PXE enabled network card. So a small set of industry standard protocols are required, DHCP and TFTP. And these protocols are very, very, very simple, just to get a basic version of the operating system over onto the client in order to install the main parts. So some terminology for WDS. Right. When you create an image to deploy with WDS, this is called a standard image. Okay, so try and visualize a room with 10 computers in it. Now, you have 10 computers and you have one Windows 10 DVD. your options are go around the computers with the DVD, install Windows, but then let's say all of your computers you want to put Microsoft Office on there, or you want to install Putty onto them. Your next option would be to put Putty onto a USB stick and walk around and install it that way, or go around and download it on them all. Now, let's say then you want to add Microsoft Office, and then you want to add Chrome, and then you want to add other software, and let's just say the list grows and grows. Before you know it, you could be in that room with those 10 PCs for hours and hours and hours, ages, okay? Now, let's just say you don't have ages, and also if you're going to do that, you're likely to, let's say you forget to install Chrome on machine 7, and you also don't do something on machine 3, and you're likely to make mistakes. So back to the first point that I said was a bit of a sales pitch about ensuring continuity. Probably the good thing about Windows deployment services is, let's say I told you a better way of doing that. We sit down at one machine and we install Windows with the DVD. Then we add on all the software we want. And then when we're happy, we turn that into a standard image. We then have a way of sending that standard image to the server and then going around all of the computers and configuring those computers to pull that standard image. Now, surely that is a more logical way to do this. So the standard image is the one you create, okay? The image comes from the name of the computer where the standard image comes from. It's called a reference computer. If you don't have PXE compliant network cards, it's still possible to do, but you need to create a special image called a discover image. This is something that we're unlikely to see out in the real world. Autocast, right? Autocast is Windows version of multicast. Autocast multicasts the image to all machines, and this begins after the first client connects. So let's say you have back in this room with these 10 computers. If each computer was to do a point-to-point connection to the server and try and draw a 10 gig image, that would initially very much slow down the network. So Windows allows all the computers to listen to a multicast address, and they can all draw the image at the same speed. This is much more efficient. Now, scale that up beyond 10 computers. Imagine if you were doing 1,000 computers, how much quicker this would be. So multicast transmission, there's no point in having multicast if you just have one computer. So after the first computer connects, the first client connects, then multicast will start. Now, there are two main files involved in the deployment of a Windows image. Okay, there are two main parts to a Windows image, and those parts are the install.wim and the boot.wim. Okay, now the boot.wim is probably the simpler of the two, or depending on how you look at it. The boot.wim is the first one that we'll encounter. So boot.wim has a thing inside it called Windows PE. Okay, now Windows PE, Windows pre-execution environment for Windows 10, is a very small operating system. And Windows PE allows you to do very basic things. Okay, so we can do things like we can set up the hard drive partition, we can set up some very basic network drivers, we can do very, very basic, simple things. And the boot.wim image, or Windows PE, has to be sent across the network first. Okay, so what we do first of all is we send over Windows pre-execution environment. Windows pre-execution environment inside the boot image installs itself and runs itself on the machine. Then we're able to send over the Windows image, the install image. Okay, so the install image contains applications, contains all the software. Okay, it contains the actual running Windows that we use every day. Now, the default boot and WIM images we can get from our Windows ISO. So if you actually right click on a Windows ISO and choose Explore, or if you open a Windows ISO, you mount a Windows ISO and then look in it, you'll see there's a folder, I think it's called Sources from memory. It's been a couple of months since I've done this, but you go in there, there's two .wim files. Wim just stands for Windows image, okay? There's a boot.wim and an install.wim. And if we remember, the boot file just contains basic settings, Windows pre-execution. So we send the boot file across first, and the boot file boots into Windows pre-execution environment. Then we can choose some settings, and Windows pre-execution environment then facilitates the installation of the install.wim file. So we can actually, for Windows 10, we can have one boot.wim file, and we can have 5 different install.wim files, okay? But the boot.wim file will always be the same. So, right, so let's say we set up Windows deployment services. We've got our reference image. Sometimes as well, you go onto a deployment and someone will give you the install.wim file, and it might be like 20 gig. They'll say, there's the install.wim. So you'll know you just need to copy that to the deployment server, and then you can begin the deployment. All right, normally you would just assume that the boot.wim is already there. So that's a basic overview of some of the terminology of Windows deployment services. The next topic is on Sysprep. So you might ask, right, we've set up our machine, we've got our reference image. How do we actually send it back to the server? How do we get this? How do we get it off the machine and onto the server? And the answer is using a thing called Sysprep. Now, there are a few different ways to do it, but we're going to look at this first because I think this is the simplest way to understand. So on Windows, we run a command called sysprep.exe, and this will pop up this wee menu here, okay? And we want to choose to generalize the operating system and shut down. Those are some simple, this is the simplest way to do it to start off. So what will actually happen is Windows will prepare an install.wim image from the machine that we are actually on. It can do that to itself. Sysprep can prepare the machine that Sysprep's running on to prepare an install.wim image ready to send to the deployment server. So here is an example of what Windows deployment services looks like, okay? We can right click here and we can do add boot image, and we can navigate to our DVD ISO and we can add a boot image, and then we can have install images here. So we run Sysprep on the machine and shut it down. Then we reboot the machine. Now, when we reboot the machine, we can choose to boot the machine to the network card, okay? And when we boot the machine to the network card, we will load up a kind of a BIOS type menu. And that BIOS type menu will allow us to select an image. And the image we're going to select is a special type of image called a capture image. And that capture image will then let us choose the install.wim file that we made with Sysprep and send it back to the deployment server, and then it'll appear in the install images over here with whatever name we give it. We can then deploy that to the rest of the machines on the network. So here is a kind of diagram that I made to kind of try and break this down a little bit. So imagine we have the server on the right here and the client on the left. Now, let's say on our client machine, we've run Sysprep and we've generated a reference image on our reference computer. We've generated a standard image on the reference computer, which is an install.wim file, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to shut the machine down, boot it to the network card, launch Windows pre-execution environment, launch the capture image, and send it to the deployment server to add it to the image store, okay? Then let's say on another client machine, we want to then send this image here back out to another client machine. We boot the client machine into Windows PE, and that allows us to choose an image from the image store, and we send a new install.wim image to the client. Okay, so the main concepts we need to know are, we have a boot.wim with Windows PE, which we can also use as a capture image. We have an install.wim, which is all of our software and settings, which we can take from a DVD, or we can generate from a reference computer, a standard image. We can generate a standard install.wim by running Sysprep on the machine. So now, let's say you do all that. Now, there are some questions that Windows asks when you first run Windows. Okay, so Windows asks a lot of questions like, do you want us to spy on you? Do you want to use voice assistants? Do you want to sign into, I don't know, MSN Messenger? All the nonsense that they ask at the beginning. So there is a way that we can add answers to these questions to an image, so that when it gets sent across the network, it will automatically answer these. And you can imagine, let's say you have your Windows deployment services set up, but you still have to go around all the computers and say, yes, no, I don't want speech recognition. No, I don't want personalized adverts. Yes, my first pet's name was John, the dog. You don't want to have to go and answer these questions. So you can create a file that has these answers in it and it's called an answer file. It's as simple as that. It's just a file that answers the questions. Now this file is an XML laid out file with key value pairs in it, and it can be called unattended.xml or auto unattended.xml. So the reason it's called that is because you're not having to stand at the machine. You're unattended, performing an unattended installation. Now, there's different types of installations. A light touch installation is where you just have to do a couple of things. Okay, you might have to go over and click yes to accept terms and conditions. Other than that, it's all automated. Zero touch installation is where you have a full auto unattended.xml answering all the questions, and you literally don't go near. You could deploy it to a computer very far away. You don't have to even be in the room. Okay. A user-driven installation is what we've done in topic 1, where we actually go through and select some options. And then there's a high-touch installation. I don't know why they call it a high-touch installation, but basically that's carried out using a DVD. So that's when you actually carry a DVD over to the machine and put it into the DVD drive and then boot into that and run it. So it's called a high touch installation, apparently. So here's an example of an answer file. We have component name, public key token, and then these fields kind of similar to HTML fields. We have usernames, domain name, password, and this file can actually be a very long file, lots of lines in it with information like, for example, look, install image. So we're telling it what image to pull from the deployment server, what the image group is, what the name is. Look, install.wim. So this file, we can tell Windows everything through this file, and it will go ahead and automatically configure it. So those are just some of the main kind of concepts of Windows deployment services. There are other ways to set up Windows images, and so we're going to have a look at those just now. Microsoft Deployment Toolkit and System Center Configuration Manager. So the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit is a free program from Microsoft. And what that does is it allows you to take images and set them up. And it lets you create answer files. And it's okay. I personally find it quite fiddly to use, shall we say. So I've got an image of it there. That's what it looks like. So what you have here is, down there you have all the different stages of a Windows installation. And believe me, there are a lot. And what you do is you click on the stage and then you set the properties over there. And this generates a file to allow you to do the installation. So Microsoft Deployment Toolkit is one way of supposedly simplifying doing deployments. And I believe some people use this to success. Now, another way is using System Center Configuration Manager. And the reason that we can't do this in this class, because we have to pay for SCCM, but we will talk about it. So what to think about if you're ever asked the question, what does System Center Configuration Manager do? It allows you to deploy software and schedule deployments of software. Okay, so administrators can deploy applications. They can get reports on the success and failure of those deployments. You can schedule those deployments. And SCCM doesn't come with Windows Server out of the box. Okay, so when you install a brand new Windows Server 2019, it doesn't have SCCM. SCCM is a separate tool, a separate program that you have to pay for, and it's for much more advanced administrations. So imagine if I said that room with 10 people in it, 10 machines, you'd be fine doing a Sysprep. But let's say we scaled it up to 10 rooms, each with 10 machines. You might want to look to Microsoft Deployment Toolkit to build the answer file to reduce the amount of actual work you do. Let's say you moved up to having, say, something the size of a college network or a very large deployment. Then you would be looking at paying to get this System Center Configuration Manager. And what this will allow you to do is synchronize updates and send deployments and pull deployments around the network. So that is it for topic 4. We've looked at SCCM, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit as alternative methods. We've also looked at Sysprep, and we looked at the different types of images involved in Windows deployment services. So that's it. I'm going to pause the recording now before and see if anyone's got any questions about any of that. Let me just stop that. So Lab 4 for Windows Server Administration. In this one, as you may have guessed, we're going to set up Windows deployment services. So the first part just involves installing the WDS role. Okay, what we will need to do this is we will need the Windows Server 2019 ISO, because we're going to take the boot and install.wim images from the ISO, and we're going to add them to the Windows Deployment Services image store in the right place. Then we're going to create an empty VM and we're going to deploy Windows onto it. Now, I think I might have just said that we need the Windows Server ISO. We don't. We need the Windows 10 client ISO. So let me just head over here. Right. Hopefully you can see my server here. Okay. And you can see I've got a couple of reds on there because I just booted it up. So I showed you the best way to manage those. It's just, I think these are just power errors because we're running this in VMware. So don't worry about that too much. Let's just hide that. There we go. That helps with my OCD. So what do we want to do? We want to add a role / feature to the server. So let's add a role feature, okay, to this server. And the role we want to add is, you might have guessed, Windows Deployment Services. So let's add that, accept the defaults. And obviously those are the two components that I spoke about in the past, the deployment server and the transport server. Okay, and let's choose to restart the server if required during the installation. And let's hit install. So that's how we do the first part here. Okay, then we're going to go into the Windows Deployment Services MMC, the Microsoft Management Console, where we can perform some installation and configuration. Now, while that's running, I'm going to show you how to set up a, we'll call it a target machine, a blank VM. So let's do File and do New Virtual Machine. Now, in this virtual machine, we're going to go for a custom configuration. Just leave things on default. Choose I will install the operating system later, because we're not going to install the operating system. We're going to send it from the server. So let's do Windows and the version of Windows it somehow knows. I don't know why it knows, but Windows 10. We could have been wanting to install Windows 8, but let's do Windows 10. Click Next, and then just say where we're gonna store it. So I'll just leave it like this just now because I'm probably going to delete this machine later. Right, next, firmware type. I would recommend going with BIOS because it's simpler. This doesn't really matter. This doesn't really matter. Now, do we want to use network address translation? No, because we need to talk to our server over the network. So at the moment, what we're going to do is leave it on network address translation because we can go into the settings and change that. Let's just get this set up. Accepting default. Let's create a virtual disk. I'm going to change that to 40, even though it doesn't really matter. Store it as a single file, makes it easier to delete later on. Name, we'll call this reference computer. Okay. Just so we don't end up with 10 different machines all called Windows 10. All right, great. Let's finish that off. Now, let's go into the settings of the virtual machine and let's change the network adapter and let's connect it to LAN segment 1 so it can talk to the domain controller. Hit save. There we go. Right, back to the Windows server. Now, it looks like Windows Deployment Services is installed. And as you can see on our main Server Manager dashboard page, we have WDS here. So now if we go to, okay, so it's just telling us, the little flag is just telling us that the feature's installed. So now if we go here, we can open the Windows Deployment Services Management console. So let's just open this up. And it looks much like DHCP, DNS. It's classic Microsoft Management Console where you click on things here and things happen in here, okay? Windows Deployment Services is not configured. So let's right click and let's configure Windows Deployment Services. Now, before you begin, it's just warning us that we need to have the Active Directory, we need to have DHCP, and we need to have DNS, we need to have an NTFS file system. Luckily, we set these things up in weeks 1, 2, and 3. Two types of installation. Let's integrate it with Active Directory. Okay, now, this is where we want to keep the image store. I would strongly recommend leaving all of this as default the first time. So the volume I've selected is also in the Windows volume. Now, ideally, we should have another disk set up to do this, but let's just proceed without care. Okay, and let's just leave everything as default. Now, here's a good one. When you boot the machine and you ask it to connect to the server, we can say, you know, don't automatically start sending things. Don't automatically talk. But what we want to do is, to make our lives easier, let's just put respond to all client computers and let's not require administrator permission. Okay, let's just respond to anyone who wants an operating system can have one. Okay, I have no idea why you would choose do not respond to any client computers, but that's probably for another day. So let's set up Windows Deployment Services now. And the final thing that I find people get caught out with is, might be quite difficult to see, but there's a little red stop sign there. So if we right click and do all tasks start, you'll see that that'll change to a little green play sign. Now we've got Windows Deployment Services running on the server. Okay, so the next thing we need is a Windows 10 ISO, right? So I'm going to go to my removable devices CD DVD drive and go to settings. And inside there, we want to put an ISO image. Now, it's likely at the moment we've got the server ISO image, but actually what we want to do is we want to stick our Windows 10 ISO in there. Okay, so that's now going into the virtual CD drive of the server. Now, install images, boot images. Oh, you see, it's popped up there. A DVD has appeared. So let's do the boot image first. Add boot image. Okay, and we're going to browse to the DVD on which that we just plugged in. So let's have a look for the DVD drive. Here it is here. And if we go into the sources folder, you'll see there they are, the two images, the boot.wim and the install.wim. So let's open and let's add and we'll call this, I mean, that's a fairly good description setup. I'm just going to do an underscore and put boot here, just to make it clearer what we're doing later on down the line, okay? Because it can get a little confusing. Yep, and let's add that to the deployment server. Now, the Windows boot.wim image is considerably smaller than the Windows install.wim image. The Windows install.wim image is quite a big file. So let me just finish off adding this, and then I will start the, okay, so finish. Now that we click on boot images, okay, we should see that our Windows setup boot is available in boot. Sometimes we may have to go up here and do refresh to get these things to refresh. What we don't have now is an install image. So as you can imagine, we're going to add an install image. Now, install images need to go into an image group. Just leave that as image group 1. And let's browse once again and choose our Windows 10 install image. Now, here we go. Look at this. Look at all the available images that are available on the Windows 10 DVD. What I'm going to do is untick all of these here, okay? But we'll leave Windows 10 Pro ticked just to make our lives easier. So the only one we want is Windows 10 Pro. Let's hit next. Name Windows 10 Pro. Perfect. Okay. At this stage, this might take sort of 5 minutes. So I'm going to pause the recording now. Let me just do pause, and we'll be back once that's finished adding. So let's resume recording. So now we've added the exciting install.wim image to our image group 1. We now have an install image and a boot image, which I've put underscore boot after it to make it very clear that it's a boot image, it's not an install image. So we should now be ready to start sending these install and boot Windows images down the network. So here is our blank machine, right? This has got nothing. This has got no CD drive, nothing in the CD drive, nothing on the hard drive. All it's got is, it's just a template. And this template is actually just a text file that VMware reads to set these up. Okay, we can look at that text file one day. So actually here, let me just show you how simple this actually is. So let's have a look. Let me just jump open with the command line and let's actually have a look at this file. Ooh, it doesn't like that for some reason. Maybe I don't have permission to look at it. What's it saying? 5 files to, you know what it is? It doesn't like the fact that there's spaces. I'd have to escape the spaces, I think. So hang on, x64 Windows 10.vmx. That might work. Yes, here we go. So inside this VMX file, it's a tiny file, okay? And all we have is things like, you know, these are the different network adapters, what's their position, what's the display name, what's the guest OS, okay? What's the power type for power off, what's the memory size. So if I changed that and restarted VMware, that would actually change the memory size of this machine, okay? Thankfully, okay, let's get out of here. Quit and don't save. We don't have to do that because we've got this nice management. But I was just showing you how simple that VMX file is. That sometimes when this breaks, you may have to go in and edit that, but hopefully we won't have to do that today. Right. When we start this is the key point, okay? When we start this, we need to get this to go into the quote BIOS, unquote. So What I'm going to do when I start it is I'm going to click and press F12 repeatedly. So, but the problem is we need to get control of the virtual machine. So we need to click into the virtual machine, but also press F12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do click F12, click F12. Okay. So here we go. Start, right? And do F12 for network boot. See that there? You have to be quick. You have to get it. Now look what's happened. It's saying press F12 for, okay. Now, in that instance, I'm glad this is on the recording because I wasn't fast enough there. So let's do, hang on. Right, here we go. We're in. Okay, we're in. You have to press F12 quite quickly. Now, there is the boot image on the Windows deployment server. So if we click return, what's going to happen is this blank machine is going to pull the boot.wim image from the server into itself. And that's going to load up Windows pre-execution environment. Windows pre-execution environment will then allow us to choose our install image. Okay, so while that's running, I'm going to head back over to the server. I'm going to show you one final bit of configuration that we need for today. We also, once we've set this machine up, okay, this machine over here, once this is installed, we're going to have a blank, brand new Windows 10 image. What we want to do is add a couple of programs to that, create a standard image, and then we want to send that custom operating system back to the server. In order to do that, we're going to need a special type of boot image, and that boot image is called a capture image. So one other thing that we need to do that can be quite tricky is we need to create a special kind of boot image. And that boot image is a boot image that allows us to send install images back into here from our client machines. And the way we do that is by creating a special version of Windows pre-execution environment called a capture image. Okay, now this capture image, all right, what I'm going to do in the convention of what we're doing here is I'm going to write it in big capitals up here. Okay, now this bit is what trips people up. You would think that here you need to browse to a boot image, to select a boot image, but you don't. What this is saying here is this is telling you to create a name for your new image. So see, when we click browse, it's going to take us to the DVD. That's not where we want to go. Okay, let's go to this PC, local disk C, okay, users administrator, somewhere here, public. In here, let's call this capture. Okay, what it's going to do is it's going to create an image called capture.wim. Now this really trips people up because it would trip me up as well if I was doing this for the first time. You would think that this wants you to tell it where to look for an image, not to create an image, but that's actually what this is doing. This is going to create a file called capture.wim. So let's click next. And what it's doing now is it's extracting from this boot image here to create a new one in that administrator public folder over here. Okay, so let's head back over to our Windows 10 machine. Aha, here we go. Now look at this, Windows deployment services. All right, let's just leave that on default. It doesn't really matter if we have the @ symbol on the 2 or whatever. Let's just click next. Okay, now let's log in as administrator. So now what we will have to do, right, is my domain is called ec.com. Well, it was last time I checked in Active Directory domain services. Hold on. Let me just make sure I'm not on ec.sa.com. Let's see. Okay, let's go Tools, Active Directory, Users and Computers, and we should see the domain in the side panel here. ec.com, right. So we can do either ec.com/administrator or administrator@ec.com. What it's telling you, enter your username in the format domain/user or user/domain. And there we're getting tripped up by the American keyboard already. So let's do ec.com/administrator and pop in the administrator password. Okay. Hopefully this will connect. An error. The username or password is not correct. Let me try again. That would help. Haha. We're in. Right, now. Great. So what do we have to choose? See this here, Windows 10 Pro. What that actually is, all right, is that is wait for this server to catch up. Oh dear. Oh, that is the install image that's inside image group 1. Okay, that we're actually seeing this on the deployment server. Okay, so if we click next and just choose some default options. Now remember, we could answer these with the answer file. This could all be automated, but at the moment we're just doing a basic deployment. Right, Windows setup will continue once the server initiates. There we go. So what's happening now is the Windows client here is pulling the operating system from the Windows deployment services image group 1. Okay, obviously we're creating a capture image here. So now that I've given you that kind of overview, what I'm going to do is just return to the lab here and say, so adding images, I've explained that. There are some customizations to do here in terms of changing the block size just to make things run a little bit faster. I'll leave that to you to look at. Creating an empty VM, we've looked at. The final part, okay, I'm going to leave for you to do in tradition of Windows Server Admin, is Sysprep and capture. So once we have, all right, this machine installed, we're going to add some software to it. Okay, add Firefox and Putty to the machine. Then we're going to send the machine, we're going to create an install.wim image out of it using Sysprep, and we're going to send it back to the deployment server. Okay, and to do that, we'll need to boot into the capture image, which I've showed you how to set up. Okay, so I've also showed you how to get into the BIOS. So hopefully you should be able to do this bit, but it may take a few attempts to get it right. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording for questions now. Hopefully that's been a good enough explanation and overview of Windows deployment services, and we'll find out if anyone has anything to ask.